Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to use Git to push our Laravel source code files up to our VPS. Let's jump right into the action. So for a bit of context, I want to start this video in VS Code, right, on our host computer. So this is where we've spent the majority of our time throughout the entire course, and the idea is that all of these Laravel files, we need a convenient way to send these to our VPS. There are many different ways to do that, but the industry standard or the most convenient workflow is to use Git. If you've never used Git before, that's okay. I can give you a brief rundown. Now, this course is not about Git, so I can't go into things in too much detail, but I can point you in the right direction. So if you've never used Git before, if you are on Windows, you can just visit the official Git website. It's git-scm.com, and then down here you'll see a download link. Obviously, it'll say download for Windows if you're actually on Windows. But just once you get that downloaded and installed, then in your command line, to make sure it's working, you could type git -- version. Now, if you're on Mac and you've never used Git before, simply running git -- version, if you don't have Git, your operating system will show a little pop-up and say, hey, do you want to install developer tools, which will include Git, and then just give it permission. Okay, cool. So that's Windows, that's Mac, that's how to get Git installed. Now, once you have Git installed, you just need to do a couple of things before you can actually start committing your files. So the first command you're going to want to run is this. It's git config -- global user.name and then a space and then just wrapped in quotes, whatever your name is. You can just put your first name if you want. You just need some sort of value there. Okay, and then you're also going to need to run this command. And to be clear, you only need to run these git config global commands if you've never ever used Git on your computer before. But anyways, it's the same thing. It's just you're saying user.email and then give it an email value. Cool. Once you've done that, you're now ready to start using Git. So the first thing we want to do, assuming that your command line is pointing towards the directory you're interested in, right? And in VS Code, if you open a folder, right, your command line is always going to be pointing to the correct directory. So we're just going to say git init. We're initializing or creating a repo out of this current folder we're in. So git init, go ahead and press enter. Cool. Now over in your sidebar, you'll notice that most of the files and folders are green, but that some of them are grayed out. For example, node modules is grayed out, vendor is grayed out, our .env file is grayed out. And that's because when you create a new project with Laravel and Laravel creates all these boilerplate files for us, you'll notice that Laravel actually creates a file for us called gitignore, or I should say .gitignore. If you go into that gitignore file, these are all of the files and folders that are not going to be tracked in Git. So like when you add all your files and you use Git to push your files to GitHub or to some sort of server somewhere, any files that are in this ignore folder are not going to be included. Now, for the most part, this is great. And for the most part, I agree with these brilliant choices that the Laravel team has made. However, and it's just my own personal preference, I don't want to ignore the public build folder. So the idea is if you wanted to, you could install Node.js on your VPS server, and then you could literally run like npm run build on the server side. That's cool, but I don't want to have to worry about that. I'm happy to just run npm run build on my local host computer and then just send those files over through Git. So again, this is just my own personal preference, but in the gitignore file, I'm encouraging you, or I'm officially recommending just for this lesson that let's remove this /public/build line. So I'm just going to delete that line entirely, and then you can go ahead and save this file. Cool. So with that change, now you can close that file. In the public folder, you can see build is no longer grayed out. Cool. Also, before we commit our files, let's just make sure that we're using our latest source JavaScript code. So in other words, just run npm run build just one last time, just to make sure that the files in our public build folder are new and up to date and are using, all of your search features, your live chat room features, so on and so forth. Cool. At this point, we are ready to commit our files, and so they're ready to push to GitHub or a server somewhere. Let me run it clear. So here's how you would do that. You would just say git add -A. This is going to add everything into the staging area. So go ahead and press enter. Cool. So now everything is ready to be added or ready to be committed. In other words, we're not saying, hey, we only want to add like a few folders or a few specific files. We're saying just add everything that's changed. And now to commit, we say git commit -m for a message and then single quotes for a message. And let's just say our first commit. And then close out the quotes and press enter. Cool. So that didn't send our files anywhere. They're still just on our local personal computer. But the idea is that now this Git repository is ready to be pushed somewhere, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, or our own, $5 a month VPS. Having said that, our VPS isn't set up yet for us to be able to push this repository to our VPS. So that's actually a great moment for us to switch gears. And in a terminal, let's SSH into our VPS on Linode. So SSH root at learning Laravel or whatever your domain is, XYZ. And let me show you what I have in mind here on our VPS. So if you cd into /var/www and run an ls, so Nginx creates this default HTML folder. You and I created this my site folder, and that's what's containing, the index.html that just says welcome to our website. Here's what I have in mind though. Let's create a couple of extra folders here in this var.www folder. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's say mkdir for make directory. Let's create a folder called our app. Okay? If you run an ls, cool. Now there's a third folder named our app, and that is where our actual Laravel files will live. However, that's not where we're going to push our files directly from our host computer. Let me explain. I know that sounds really confusing. The first 10 times I heard this concept, it confused me, but hang in there just another minute with me. I'm also going to say mkdir, and I'm just making this up, but I'm going to call it like our repos. Go ahead and press enter, run an ls. So the idea is that we're going to push our Git files from our host computer into our repos, and then the server will detect once a push has actually completed, right? Like once 100% of the files have actually been transferred onto this computer's hard drive, only then we can set up an automated script that will copy the entire folder all at once into our app, right? And so the idea is Nginx will be serving up the files that live in this folder, but in terms of where, we're pushing files from our host computer up to our VPS, that is what this our repos folder can be for. Now, I would cd into our repos, and the idea is that, one VPS box, one $5 a month server could host 20 different websites if they're not getting very much traffic. So in this folder, we could have separate folders. So I would probably say make directory our app. So in other words, and then, you don't have to do this, but if I cd into our app and run pwd, so the idea is this is where we're going to be sending our files from our Git host computer up to our VPS server. var www our repos our app. And then once the server detects like, hey, because you might send like 5 megabytes worth of files, right? And that can take some time, and you don't want to push just a few files live through Nginx. You want the entire website all at once to go live through Nginx. So as soon as 100% of the files you're transferring have actually been received, then our server can automatically copy this entire folder into our app folder that lives in var www. So how in the world do we make this happen? Well, do this with me. Make sure that you've cd'd into this directory. So again, just to be clear, you could say cd/var www our repos/our app. Make sure you're in that directory, and now we're going to turn this into a bare Git repository. Actually, before we do that, let's configure our server so that the default branch for a new Git repo is the name of main. So git, you only need to do this once on a new VPS box, but it would be git config -- global init.default branch, and then the value we want is simply main. Go ahead and press enter. Cool. Now we're ready to turn this folder into a bare Git repository. So you just say git init --bare. Go ahead and press enter. Beautiful. Now, check this out. In this directory, if you run an ls, you can see that there's a folder named hooks. If we cd into that hooks folder and run a ls, you can see there are all sorts of different hooks or events that you could hook onto. In other words, when a certain event happens, then this script will automatically run. So in this folder, we're going to create our own brand new file. Let me run a clear just so we're back up at the top of the screen. And in that hooks folder, I want you to create a brand new file. So we can say touch and name it post. And this name is important. I'm not making this up. It needs to be named post-receive. Go ahead and press enter. If you run another ls, cool. There's that file that we just created, a hook named post-receive. Now we just need to nano that file or begin editing it. So nano post-receive. We're going to say that we're running a bash script. So it's #bin/bash. Okay. Now we're just going to write one line of code. We're going to use git, and we're going to set --work tree to equal /var/www/our-app. Don't worry, I'll explain the entire line of code at the end in just a minute here. Then a space --git-directory or dir equals /var/www/our-repos/our-app. At the very end, we're also going to say checkout-f. Beautiful. Now here's what this is going to do. This is saying that the Git directory, this is where we're sending our files from our host computer, right? This is where the Git repo actually lives. And post-receive means after we've received all of the incoming files, this is where we want the Git repo to actually be checked out. Like this is where the files on the hard drive should be readily available. And Git is going to wait until the perfect millisecond of once all the files have actually finished transferred. Once 100% of them have transferred, then Git is going to essentially copy the files and make them available here. Okay, we can go ahead and save this file. So Control X, say Y for yes, press enter to accept that file name. Now we do need to change the permissions on that file so that it can be executable. So we're just going to say chmod and then a space +X, and then the name of the file we want to give those permissions to is post-receive. Go ahead and press enter. Beautiful. So now our VPS is set up as a Git server. So now we just need to connect the dots. We need to go back onto our host computer, and let me run a clear. Let's push our files from our host computer up to our VPS. Now, if you've ever used GitHub before, you're probably familiar with the following command, right? Push origin main. Let's break down what's going on here. So you're pushing your files, the main branch, but this keyword here, this is the remote. Where are you pushing the files? The idea is you can have multiple remotes set up for just one repo. So instead of origin, let's create a remote. We could literally name it anything: pizza, giraffe, unicorn. But the idea is that you could leave origin to be GitHub or whatever Git tracking service you're using, but we can set up another remote, let's call it like production or the live server, right? And that can just point towards our VPS box. So here's what we're going to do. Git remote add, and again, I'm just going to call it production. There's nothing special about that name. And now here's the important value. It's SSH://root at, and then you would type in your domain or your IP address of your VPS box. So for me, it's learninglaravel.xyz. Now, we're not done yet. /, and then we spell out the file path of where we want to push this Git repo to. So that would be /var/www/our, you need to spell this correctly, our repos/our app. Cool. Go ahead and press enter. And now it's as simple as just pushing. So we just say git push. Instead of origin main, it would be production main. Go ahead and press enter. And what's really cool is because we already added our public SSH key to our server, it can trust us, right? Because we were connecting to Git through SSH, it can just automatically trust us. It's this easy. It's done. It transferred all of the files. Now, to make sure that it actually transferred them back in our VPS, you could just go cd/var/www, right? Run an ls. We're interested in this folder, right? We want to see, did it automatically copy over the files into this folder? So you could just run cd our app, run an ls. There you have it. All of our Laravel files perfectly available on our VPS. Now, with our VPS command line pointing towards that directory, this is a great moment to let you know, or remind you that, remember, the vendor folder is grayed out. Git ignore is ignoring that folder. Now, the vendor folder contains all of the files that Composer would download for you automatically. So on our server, pointing towards our Laravel directory, you would just say Composer install. Go ahead and press enter. I'm going to say yes, go ahead and use it as the root user. And this is just like running an npm install, right? It's going to look at your ingredients list for Composer and download all of the necessary packages to populate that vendor folder. Cool. So now that all of our files are in place, let's go edit our Nginx configuration file.